said just say my name?
Yeah.
Yeah. Drew Bekius.
That wasn't a very broad question.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So my story, I guess, in a lot of ways is kind of what you'd find typical of, your average evangelical American, for the most part anyway, or at least it starts off that way. So I was raised in a small Baptist church, small town, central Minnesota. When I was 3 years old, prayed the sinner's prayer, the prayer of salvation with my mother, sort of the typical, I guess, maybe cliched almost sort of experience with your parents, praying when you're 3 years old. For somehow, some way, we ended up doing it in the bathroom. We wound up in the bathroom, kneeling over the edge of the bathtub, repeating after her and, asking Jesus to come into my life and all that good stuff. But raised much as your typical evangelical Baptist. Sunday school, Awana programs, growing up, a youth group, Bible studies, all those good things. It was, though, in the summer of 1994, the summer before my freshman year of high school, was kind of when everything sort of elevated up a notch for me. It was early, so my high school years were filled with not the kinds of things that normal high schoolers do. It was in the summer before my freshman year of high school, I joined my youth group in a trip to Washington, D.C. We went to a conference put on by Youth for Christ. It was what they build is a peer evangelism super conference, okay? And it was 1 week there doing seminars, workshops, all kinds of things, but I came back just with an incredible passion for Jesus Christ. I was all fired up for Jesus and bound and determined to save the whole world for him, or at least the parts of it that were close to me that I came in contact with. Later that year I started what would eventually become an award-winning ministry initiative in my public high school, doing Bible studies and prayer meetings and things like that, eventually worship services. Through my high school years, I ended up doing work with a variety of organizations, ministry organizations. When I was 17 years old, I preached my first sermon on a Sunday morning before the entire church. And so it was cool. I loved it. It was really exciting. And it very much so came to define me. Jesus was my everything. Of course, it made sense then to go to Bible college, seminary, and all that. And so following high school, I packed up all my stuff, left my small town central Minnesota roots behind, and came here to the big city of Chicago, to this very institute, Moody, and did my BA, my M.Div here. Along the way, started pastored at 2 churches. What started off as an internship at Bethel Church, where you and I first met, what started off there as an internship became a staff position, part-time pastoral staff. I was the pastoral assistant and kind of pastored the seniors group there for a number of years. Your typical pastoral stuff, preaching, teaching, did some pastoral counseling, funerals, started new ministries, tried to improve upon existing ones, things like that. So did that for 7.5 years all told. And then from there I went to a small church as lead pastor in the western Chicago suburbs. So I was there for 4 years as lead pastor. Did some really cool, fun, great stuff there. Seriously, all of it, I loved it all. I loved pastoring. It's all I ever wanted to do. Any job has its hang-ups and frustrations, but seriously, I loved all of it. I love even the board meetings. I couldn't get enough board meetings. They could go on all night, and I didn't care. And I loved my faith. I truly, honestly believed everything I preached. The tradition of theological tradition that I held to was very optimistic, big picture, forward-thinking, encouraging, empowering, non-judgmental, non-critical, just very hope-filled version of Christianity. And I loved it, and it was great until it all started to fall apart. And so that was, now we're looking somewhere around the fall of 2010, when I guess you'd say with ministry going very well and just more time to just, think more fully about everything. I guess just the answers that I used to find satisfying just kind of lost their satisfactoriness, okay? And I began to sense more and more just clouds of doubt and things like that sort of vying over and taking over my faith. And like anyone, what do you do when that happens? Well, you pray. You seek God. You ask Him to restore your faith, revive your faith, heal your faith. And so I would do that. And I prayed and begged and pleaded, cried out to God, long, sobbing prayers till mid-hours of the night, just begging and pleading with Him that He would restore my faith, heal my faith, revive my faith. God, You are the God of wonders, and here I am, and I'm trusting in You. God, heal my faith, strengthen my faith. And the more I prayed and the more I begged and the more I pleaded, the more it just continued to fall apart. And so eventually, and I'm sure we'll probably end up maybe talking more about these kinds of things later, I don't know, but eventually it became clear after a year and a half of begging and pleading with nothing in return, eventually it became clear that I needed to transition out of pastoral ministry, partly in a last-ditch effort to revive my faith and believe in the existence of God once again. So I transitioned out of ministry the first half of 2012. It was later that year when I came to grips with myself, finally came to accept that yes, I had indeed become an atheist. And then it was the following year when I came out to friends and family, started blogging and writing about it. And then that 2013 resigned my ordination credentials, so I'm no longer an ordained minister. It wasn't until July of 2014 when I discovered the Clergy Project, if you've heard about them at all or seen anything that I've posted online. The Clergy Project has just been an oasis. Now, I didn't come across them, I even realized they were in existence until a full 2 years after I lost my faith and left the ministry. The Clergy Project is a community of former pastors and active pastors who no longer believe in the supernatural. And prior to finding this group, I knew it couldn't be the case, but it felt as if I was the only one who had ever lost their faith. I felt as if I was the only pastor who had ever become an atheist. And but here with this group, I found out that just wasn't the case. I found hundreds and hundreds of others, and those are just the ones vocally part of this brand new organization that just started 2 years ago, or 4 years ago now. But there I just found this incredible sense of community and just this network of support. And in reading and hearing the stories of all these hundreds others, I just found this sense of hope that, you know what, things can be good, life can be good. And now my life, seriously, I have more joy and more excitement. I feel happier, more joyful than I ever have at any point, certainly during my Christian experience. Yeah, life is amazing. It's good. It's got its hang-ups, it's got its difficulties, but it's amazing, and I love it. So, there we go. I don't know where we go from here. Yeah. So, right now, I mean, as far as where I'm at now, where I want to go, so as we mentioned before off camera, I work at a steakhouse, so I'm a manager, customer service manager there, you know, that's kind of my day job. That's not during the day, you know, but that's how I pay bills. But yes, I'm involved in a few different organizations. I'm at the Clergy Project. Little things, really. I manage their Facebook page, and I manage. There's two websites. There's a public site, and then there's a private site. And the private site is where everybody can connect anonymously, because a lot of the pastors. There's pastors who some of them are very comfortable where they're at. Others who are. It's not easy leaving all of your education and professional experience and the respect of your peers and the love of your family, and facing a reality where everyone you know will condemn you in thought, if nothing else, to hell. And what are you going to do for money and income? Oftentimes your choices, professionally speaking, if you're a pastor who realizes he or she is an atheist, oftentimes your choices are take my now worthless education and feed my family on minimum wage for the rest of my life, or put on that smiling face and just keep doing it. Just keep doing it and try and do it with the greatest amount of integrity you can. Hopefully a great job, great transition out will come across your path, but oftentimes it doesn't. And so within the Clergy Project, I mean, not all of them by any means, but you have a portion there who are in ministry, are closeted atheists and are, not because they have this agenda, but just because they see no other option. And so at the end of the day, you got to feed your family, and so you do what you can. Maybe they kind of try and minimize certain negative impacts, but you got to do what you can do. For me, in my case, I didn't come across Clergy Project until I was out of the ministry for 2 years. So I wasn't there for any of that. I had no network, no support. But as I was transitioning out, I went to the steakhouse where I had been a server at for money during my master's. So I was pastoring, I was doing my M.Div here, and then I was also waiting on tables. And so I went back there and I said, hey, I'm going to be looking for something new. Any chance you might have a spot for me here? And he said, yeah, come on over. And it ended up working into a management position. So that's where I'm at right now. And so that was great for me because it is a great job. It's a great source of income. So I did not have the stress that a lot of others in my situation have had. I'm financially taken care of. It's good. I was able to make a nice, clean transition out. As far as my work in other things I'm doing these days, I'm in process of being licensed as a human celebrant with the American Humanist Association. With the American Humanist Association, in the process of being licensed as a humanist celebrant, so be able to do a lot of that work that I did as pastoring, but now without the faith component as secular work. I'm also I work with the Freedom from Religion Foundation, so I no official capacity there, just a member, and I do a little bit of volunteering and things like that. So I have my website, drewbekius.com, where I try and blog weekly, something like that. And then I started a little while ago, I started working on a book where I share my story. And so kind of nearing the end of that, but there's a lot that goes into it, and I have a lot of other things I'm active in, along with being a father. And, so I have 2 kids who are 12 and 10. And so try and, spend a lot of time with them as much as I can. And so very full life, trying to finish the book out along the way as well. So, but I think in a sense there's influences on every element of everything you do. So I guess in a general way, yes. Nothing deliberate. And let me maybe take a moment and define atheism, okay? 'Cause there can be some controversy over it. There really shouldn't be. It's a fairly simple word. Some like to envision like this big community or social network, or all an atheist is someone who does not believe, who lacks belief in supernatural things, be it a personal God or any kind of supernatural thing. So someone who lacks belief. And so that those who would fall into that category of person is as varied as humanity itself. So there's all kinds of great ways to stereotype what an atheist is or looks like, but all it is someone who lacks belief in God, many of which go to church every Sunday and just don't have the strength to admit it, or just struggling with it. Maybe they haven't come to fully embrace it themselves or don't want to, and that's fine. One cool thing about the Clergy Project, by the way, is we are not in any business of trying to deconvert anyone or any pastors or anything like that. If you want to come, if that's who you are, then come on over. But and that's my agenda as well, or lack of agenda, that is I am very content in allowing people to believe. Belief played a very powerful formational role for the positive in my life. I can barely begin to delineate all the positive ways that my life is better because of my faith. And so, I would by no means try and deny someone else that same journey. Standing where I stand, sitting where I sit, I do believe that my position is that ultimately it's best to move beyond it. But I'm not going to force that on anyone or anything like that. And so, atheism is just lack of belief in God, God's supernatural things. As far as influences on that, there was no secret group that was trying to like deconvert me. There were no individuals or friends who were trying to deconvert me. There was no book. I had not read a single atheist book from an atheist perspective until after I was saying, well, I guess, like, if this is where I am, like, if I genuinely don't believe in God, I guess I should try and read a little bit more about this stuff. I hadn't really before. And so, I had read Christians talking about atheism, but I had never read Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens or Daniel Dennett or, any of these guys. I hadn't read any of them prior to already realizing I don't believe in God anymore. And so that played no role whatsoever in it because I hadn't read any of it. Oftentimes, though, that's the assumption is you're doing these readings, and it deconverts you. Or no, there was none of that. The biggest portion of reading that deconverted me was the Bible. Actually, I got to a point in that year and a half of just like struggling for my faith. I never stopped praying, but I had to stop reading because the more I read, the more it just so shattered my faith. And we're talking about the Bible. And so I got to a point where I could hardly read any verse from anywhere in the Bible without it just doing crazy things in my head and in my soul. And so I had to. I would keep praying, God, please. But then I'd go out and I'd like open it up and start reading, and then sure enough there'd be this thing, and I'd just be, but God, how is this? God, I'm sitting here. God, teach me. God, I want to know. I want to learn. God, reshape my perspective. Help me see what I'm missing. Help me, reshape this for me. I'm begging and pleading for you to reshape how I'm seeing this. Your Spirit is within me. So do it. I'm waiting. I want. And yet the more I think about it, this is the only way I can see it fitting together. Well, God, if you're in charge, then, and I'm willing, then why aren't you fitting it together in the way it should be? And so I suppose the question is on influences. Really, yeah, that's it. Like I said a moment ago, for the first 2 years, after I had lost my faith, there was, I kind of felt like I was all on my own. So I did kind of know there was this sort of one of the last straws in my clinging to faith was when I was this story I can tell you if you want later or whatever, but there was this interaction with a group of pastors that I was a part of where I just I had the impression that, yeah, they kind of all were where I was at, but they were like, but what else are we supposed to do? We're pastors. So you just keep pastoring whether you believe or not. And they were all, I was kind of on the more progressive end of evangelicalism, and they were all much more conservative and fundamentalist and fiery than me, and I'm just like, wow, if even these guys are just like, yeah, we all doubt just as much as you do, but what else are we going to do? We got to put bread on the table. I was just like, wow, all of you? And then I was just like, God, what the hell? Well, and then there was, I kept praying for another year after that, but that was kind of, in a sense, sort of that last straw where I was just like, but I have nothing else left to fight in this fight. And there's nothing, as much as I'm begging for help, there's no help from within, there's no mystical, supernatural, divine strengthening from within. Every bit of strength is self-manufactured. Well, self-manufactured in another direction, then I can't keep going through this emotional, psychological torment. It's been 2 years now. I need to move on with my life. There's no evidence, within or without. I need to move on with my life. And so those are the influencers. The influencers were within my Christian realm, not from without. And maybe along with that, let me sort of debunk at least one false definition of atheism, okay? If I may. Okay, so, I already kind of talked about how there's this, general idea that there's like this cloud of, atheists with agendas, and I have had some, I get some, I don't want to make it sound like my following is bigger than it is, or the contacts I get are more numerous than they are, but I do get some feedback and questions and contact from around the world, and there's one question I get every so often. I got it recently where he was asking, he's thinking about becoming an atheist. What does he need to do to become an atheist? I think he even said, what sets of rituals do I need to embrace? where do I need to go to become an official atheist? What group does he need to talk to become an official atheist? And I think, as I already talked about, clearly all of that falls away when it's just somebody who doesn't believe, and regardless of who you are or what you're a part of or what else you're passionate about or what else you care about, whether or not you're a humanist who wants to just see humanity endure, and the good of humanity with everything, or whether you hate everybody, either way, an atheist is just someone who doesn't hold belief in God, who is not convinced that God exists. One thing I would like to, there's a very slight change of terminology that I think can be very deceptive, okay? And at times it's intentional, at times it's not. But rather than saying that an atheist is someone who does not believe in God, or an atheist is someone who lacks belief in God, the wrong way to switch that up would be to say that an atheist believes that no God exists, or an atheist believes there are no gods. Okay, so the difference is subtle, but here's where it makes a big difference. Okay, so if you think of belief as a thing to be embraced, a thing to be held, something you enter into. Okay, you trust, you enter into trust, you enter into belief, you willfully accept it. If you lack that thing, you lack that possession called belief, well, it's something there, but you don't have it. You lack it. It's not something you possess, okay? That would be the truth with this. It's simply there, and you don't have it. To switch it up and say that an atheist believes there is no God, well, that's saying, well, I do have belief, I just believe something different, okay? Most atheists, in fact, I know a lot of atheists now. None of them that I know of. I do not know of anyone who has set themselves up in advance to say, no matter what evidence comes in, I refuse to admit that it's even a possibility. Everyone I know would say, well, yeah, as soon as there's compelling evidence, then it's not necessarily a matter of belief, it's just acknowledgement that there's evidence, it points to it, and there it is. So atheists tend to be very much willing to go wherever the evidence leads. If evidence one day points to the fact that, let's say, if evidence points to the fact one day that 75% of Americans are vegetarian, well, then I'll acknowledge that. But until then, it doesn't matter how much you tell me that 75% of Americans are vegetarian. Until I see the evidence, I'm not going to believe it. I'll let you, okay, go ahead, believe that. I love vegetarians, but I don't believe 75% of them of Americans are vegetarians. As much as you might argue for it, I don't see the evidence. I haven't seen the study. So it's not that I believe something different. It's just, no, there's lack of evidence, and so I don't acknowledge the claim. Same thing here. It's not that we're coming to it with a predisposed agenda that there cannot be such a thing. No. I'll acknowledge the possibility, but I haven't seen compelling evidence, and so I don't hold that belief. Where that plays tricky and why it's important to make the distinction is some would come in and say that, see, even atheists believe something. You just believe there isn't a God as opposed to believing there is one. But either way, it's a belief about God. And say, well, no, you're playing this semantic game. It's a semantic game, but it's not. No, I'll believe it when it's there. I'll acknowledge it when it's there, but I haven't seen it. With me, I would take that though one step further and say, maybe there is such a thing as gods. Maybe there is some form of divine being. I guess I haven't seen any information on it, and so I'm not convinced that it is. The Muslim version of God, or the Hindu version of God, or the Buddhist version of the divine. Maybe, I guess, but I sure haven't seen anything that points to it. And so just like that's my perspective towards Buddhist gods, so that's most atheists' version towards the Christian God and any other. Now, I would take that though a step further with the Christian God, and I would say, not only am I kind of open, I guess, if the evidence leads, I would say, no, I'm convinced. Maybe there is the Buddhist concept of the divine, but I'm convinced there is not. The God of the Christian Bible is not. That I'm convinced. I'm 100% sure. Just because it's been tested in my life and it's fallen incredibly flat. And so, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm delusional. Maybe, whatever. But I'm personally convinced of it. So, I don't know. Yeah, no, great question. Just as how atheists are as diverse as humanity itself, so I would So I hope it's not sidestepping the question to say that atheists would seek counseling for the same diversity of reasons that the rest of humanity would, you know, even in wrestling with spiritual questions, you know. So, you know, yeah, even in terms of that, just oftentimes, again, it's diverse as humanity itself, but oftentimes, certainly the vast majority of atheists I've known, if not all of them, have been very much committed to pursuit of truth and evidence and just seeing what is real. Don't bother me with your thoughts or your opinions. No, I want to see evidence. And because of that, there can be, and because of other religious influences on their own lives, there can be, just like with the whole of humanity itself, just this tension of, okay, well, they say this, they say that, but this is what I see. What is truth? You know, I would love for it to be this or that, but what is it really? You know, so they're going to seek counseling even for that, for anything, for any marriage, family, job, depression. You know, more you know, clinical counseling issues, however you define that. I'm not a clinical counselor, so I'm not sure exactly, but, you know, just the whole wide spectrum, you know.
So you kind of mentioned that you were involved in pastoral counseling.
Mm-hmm.
This is a passion for you.
Yeah.
How do you view counseling as a whole now? How do you think as an atheist you would counsel
Yes.
versus being a Christian counselor?
Yeah, so the first part of your question was, how did I view counseling as a pastor? Is that what the first part was? Or
I guess more so like, how do you view counseling now versus how you view counseling now?
okay. Yeah, no, how I view counseling now as opposed to how I view counseling then. I mean, I view it very much the same. I mean, you have, so there's, you know, I suppose if you picture counseling as sort of this large umbrella, and then there's all these subdivisions of kinds of counseling underneath the umbrella. I mean, if you just take the word counsel, you know, me coming up to you as a friend, putting my arm around you and saying, hey, you know, maybe this. Actually, a good friend of mine just this morning was saying, hey, what do you think about this? Talking about like sort of job situation type things, working in with education, what's the best route? And yeah, it's just a friend advising, giving their thoughts. Well, if you did this, you know, this is how I would counsel you. This is the course I would encourage you to take. It can be that, totally interpersonal, informal, relational. Obviously, then it can be, you know, go all the way, you know, more therapeutic versions, therapist, you know, psychologist, psychotherapist, you know, all that different stuff, which, you know. So as far as how I view it, I mean, I view it as varied as I did then. I mean, maybe I would, you know, as a pastor, certainly my prayer was that God, by His Spirit, would give me insight to counsel in, you know, with wisdom and truth, and in the, you know, take the best course of action. I would pray for His guidance as I counseled, but actually the definition of counseling, what it is, what it looks like, I don't think has changed at all, you know. So
Yeah.
it still is what it is. The biggest one I think of right off the bat, misconceptions about atheism, is that, there's a whole list. A friend of mine actually just wrote an article on his blog, 15 misconceptions about atheism, or, you know, 15 things that we're not that you say we are, or something like that. Great blog, by the way. I could give you, I know you talked about like research and resources and stuff. I can give you a ton of resources and ways to look, you know, if you're interested in that later. But this particular individual, his name is Neil Carter. He's a former pastor in the Deep South, where it's a lot more dangerous to be an atheist than it is here. And he's a former pastor there. His blog is called Godless in Dixie. But he was writing about, you know, this post that I just mentioned. One popular one, you know, maybe the most popular one, is that atheists are angry. You know, and I mean, in a generalized sense of what you think of as an angry person, like I don't know that I've ever met just like an angry atheist, you know, who, or at least not one who's angry because of their atheism, you know. And as a Christian pastor, we would say that anger is good if it's directed towards evils in the world. It's good to be angry at injustice. It's good to be angry at sin. It's good to be angry if someone, violates somebody. So it's good. It's loving to be angry at certain things, is what I would have said. And that too. So, are atheists angry at certain things? Yes. Especially when they see, probably one, passion point of a lot of atheists is maybe a form of anger towards religious, what would you say? Religious, I want to say religious violence, which is certainly part of religious violence, religious, just bludgeoning religious attacks against other religions or against other people, trying to force or demand that everyone believe like them, and because that's something we face on occasion, and because that's a context that a lot of atheists come out of, well, that's something they're extra passionate about. Is there a form of anger embedded in it? Maybe, I guess, just as there's a form of anger embedded in anything anyone's passionate about. If you're passionate about children, then you're angry about those that abuse them. If you're passionate about politics, well, you get angry when the other side is winning, I guess, or at least when you see injustices taking place because the other side is winning. Yeah, I don't know. So is there a form of anger? Yes, but is it the default? No, most atheists I've seen the typical atheist I've seen is much happier than the typical Christian I've seen. Let me say that. Another misconception would be angry at God. Maybe that's a subset of that. And oftentimes the assumption, the implication is that you're an atheist because, because God wronged you or something. I've seen a lot of Christians who are angry because they believe that God has robbed them of something. In pastoring, I've seen all kinds of Christians who are just struggling with God, and God, why? And just depressed and angry and frustrated and terrorized because of the things God is doing and allowing and permitting in their lives. Okay? And obviously as a Christian counselor, you try and help them work through that. Okay? But nonetheless, I've seen so many Christians just so turned inside out with frustration about what God's doing in their lives. I'm not sure I've seen any atheist turned inside out about what God's done because they don't believe He's done it. Most atheists I've seen take a very, very much take it as it comes kind of mindset towards life. Of course bad things are in life. Or maybe the stereotypical Christian, maybe, I don't want to pigeonhole Christians either. I was one for a long time. But maybe you could possibly say that the stereotypical Christian response is, I come across bad things in the world. Why would God allow this? Right? We have the whole question, the theological question of why does God allow evil in the world? And if He's sovereign, and if He's all powerful, and if He's all knowing, and if He's all compassionate, then why would He allow this? And you can stay up late at night, every night, debating within your soul how God could allow this. Most atheists, they just say, well, the world is messed up. And yes, because of our humanistic desires, we want to work through and we want to help make the world a better place. But why is the world messed up? Well, it's not because there's any God asleep at the wheel. No, we just don't believe there is one. So it makes sense that it's messed up because people are kind of messed up. And maybe some atheists would say, and religion kind of helps get it messed up a little bit more. So not angry at God. I don't know any atheists who have set the course of their agenda because of God, because they don't believe He's there. Just like they're not going to blame the tooth fairy for the injustices in the world, and they're not going to blame Santa Claus because they didn't get a motorcycle. No, they weren't expecting a motorcycle for Christmas because they couldn't afford one, and they don't have any friends to give them one, so why would they expect Santa Claus to give them a motorcycle at Christmas? Well, likewise, they're not going to be upset with God because they couldn't afford a motorcycle at Christmas. They can't afford one. Not going to blame the Easter Bunny, not going to blame Santa Claus, not going to blame Zeus, or not going to blame any of the other gods of the world, so why would they blame the Christian one? They're not angry at God. So those are some of another big one is became an atheist, or we are an atheist. We are atheists because we just want to sin. And that's a huge one, because we just want to sin. And as far as sin in the presence of humanity by itself, I've seen a lot of sinners in church, okay? Of course, you have the question of defining sin, and kind of one of the curious things of Christianity and of religion in general, but even just with it, no one in Islam agrees on what is, immoral. No one in Christianity agrees on what is immoral or sinful. Even the groups themselves don't agree on what is the definition of sin or what constitutes a sin. They all have slightly different ideas. But however you define it, every church has people who sin, which, of course, they realize that and they'll openly accept it. Well, of course, we're sinners. We're in process of redemption, okay? But then you have some who, you have how many people really openly admit it? That, well, I can sin, there's the whole, we don't want to, straw man Christianity, but kind of the cliched straw man that somebody would say against Christianity is right, you sin freely because you're forgiven, okay? And certainly, I don't know that there's anyone who willfully says, oh, I sin freely because I'm forgiven. But we don't get stressed out about it because we're forgiven, right? I know as a Christian pastor, if somebody, I'm really struggling with this sin, I'm so ashamed, say, listen, Christ has freed you from that shame. Yes, try not to sin, but Christ has freed you from it, okay? Live in the freedom and in the redemption that you have. Don't beat yourself up about it, okay? So are there Christians that sin? Yes. Does everybody sin? Yes. Are there atheists who sin? Sure, whatever that means. Although, just as nobody can agree on what sin is, atheists would say, well, does even the word pertain anymore? But morality, is there a morality? Is there a moral core? Is there this desire? Again, just like no Christians, a collective whole of Christians are going to disagree a little bit on what it means to sin and what is moral. So atheists will disagree on what is moral, but they still have morality, and that's another misconception of atheism is you can't have any morals, you can't have any ethics because obviously you don't believe in God. Obviously you can't, you don't have this acknowledgement of absolute truth, and so how can there be an absolute right and wrong? Obviously you can't have that. And so, well, we can talk about that more later, I guess, but nobody that I know of has said, I think if someone is a religionist, if someone is a Christian, they're like, I want to sin freely, they're just going to do it. They're not going to stop believing in God over it. They'll just do it. And if they believe that they're forgiven, well, then they're forgiven. If they don't, well, they'll adjust their views somewhat. Nobody leaves faith in God in order to sin more. They just sin more and find some other theological way to take care of it. Atheists don't become atheists to sin. They become atheists because they have no choice. They've seen the evidence and they're not convinced, period. I didn't choose it. I'm just not convinced by it. That's it. So there's a handful of stereotypes, things to change. I don't know. I mean, I guess really the biggest thing that would set them apart is, generally speaking, I almost said there's no religious baggage. But no, I wouldn't say there's no religious baggage. I would say that the religious baggage is maybe less defined because there's still influences. They've still had their uncle who's, continually berating them, from his, let's say, just to change it up so we're not just talking about a Christian context, from, his Islamic context, or even, there's fundamentalist Buddhists too, we don't want to just pick on the Muslims either, what I mean? So, he's got his uncle though, who's always berating him, from a fundamentalist perspective. He's got his, maybe he's spent gone to even just a handful of religious ceremonies where there's been some element of religious teaching, and maybe, let's say, it had something to do with the the future, with eternity, some sort of eschatological sense, and maybe that's kind of always haunted him, So I guess I think the most helpful thing to say in as you sit down to counsel an atheist is just realizing that. Rather than assuming what position they're coming from, just asking questions and realizing that it could be anything. I mean, just like when you sit down with a Christian to counsel a Christian, you're not going to automatically assume Just because you're a Christian, you're not going to automatically assume they believe everything the same way you do. If the counseling intersects with things of faith, then you're going to address those things of faith. If it doesn't, you're not. Or maybe you would bring some of that in, maybe not, I don't know. I guess I'd say the same thing with counseling an atheist is just try not to make assumptions, ask questions when they're appropriate, but it's realizing, just the fact that they're an atheist alone, just that fact alone, keep in mind it says more about what they're not than what they are, okay? All it says is that they don't believe there is, or that they're not currently convinced that there is supernatural force of any sense anywhere, okay? And so you ask questions on it, if it applies or if it doesn't. Maybe it would say, maybe if you found out someone was an atheist, maybe it would say something about their natural perspective of looking for evidence and of being convinced by evidence, looking for hard facts as opposed to just making up conclusions. Or just accepting something at face value. Maybe there's somebody who's not just going to automatically take for granted, just believe everything you say. They're going to, well, no, explain that to me, show me. But a lot of Christians are that way too. Oftentimes the term free thinker is associated with atheist. But as a Christian, I consider myself a free thinker. I just freely thought that all the evidence was in favor of Christianity, which shocks a lot of atheists. They're like, really? See, atheists oftentimes stereotype Christians just like Christians stereotype atheists. We all stereotype that which we're least familiar with. It's just kind of part of how society works and just your mental framework, psychology. You know what is immediate to you and what don't. You just kind of, you latch on to key concepts and just sort of, oh, well, they're this. Oh, well, that was that too. I guess that must be the same, maybe. And so I think just the big key concept is just like you wouldn't assume all Christians are the same, so you're not going to assume all atheists are the same. And you're going to assume, as you come to parts of life, as you're counseling them about their marriage, maybe a good starting point is as you're counseling someone about their marriage, it's realizing that they're not assuming that their marriage is supernaturally held together by a divine being. No, it's simply a sociological framework. Or maybe it's something more than that. It can be as varied as anything, Is that helpful?
It is.
Yeah? Yeah? If you want to direct it a little bit more, feel free to do that.
Yeah, no, I think you touched on it
Okay.
pretty well.
Okay.
Because, the more I'm listening to you talk about atheism in general, the more I'm realizing that because atheism is defined as the lack of believers, what sets it apart is pretty much the lack of having a different element in
Yeah.
your daily life, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe a couple other things real quick along with that. Along with the lack of part, and I was going to mention this earlier, and then I kind of drifted somewhere else and forgot. My daughter, actually, so she's in the 6th grade, and they were having they're starting a new sociology segment on world religions, and they took a part of the segment, and they were talking about religion, or about atheism, and they had talked about atheism, and then they went on to something else. I think the teacher said, I actually just wrote an article on it, but the teacher said something about, can anyone name the top 5 religions in the world, or in America? And one student raised their hand, Christianity, yes, of course. Another person raised their hand, atheism. They just finished talking about atheism, so of course atheism. And she said, no, actually it's not. She said atheism, as we just talked about, atheism is lack of belief, which kind of goes hand in hand with lack of religion for the most part. So almost by definition, atheism is lack of religion. It's the opposite of religion. It's religionless rather than a form of religion. Another religion, it's absence of religion, is what she told him. Almost by definition. It's a little, you can participate in Christianity and still be an atheist. There's a whole segment of Buddhism that is distinctly atheist. So you can be religious and yet an atheist, but generally they go hand in hand, that atheism is absence of religion. So along with things to take away as you're sitting down with an atheist, go ahead and ask questions. Don't automatically assume, but you can kind of, as a starting point, make a general assumption that not only are they not convinced that divine beings exist, but they're also most likely not actively religious. I mean, I would suggest that atheism is a healthier point than believing in any supernatural existence of any supernatural beings. I would say that in of itself is a healthier state. Beyond that, I mean, it's going to be, I don't think we would disagree in what is healthy and what is not. At least you and I probably wouldn't. I mean, you'll have, one of the tenets of humanism, okay? One of the tenets of humanism is that there is, and I'm paraphrasing it here, so it might be a little different than what's actually worded. In fact, I guarantee it is a little different than what it's actually worded, but it's something along the line of that, the suggestion that humanity is going to, that humanity is happier, healthier, more beneficial when it is lived in relationship, when it is serving one another, helping one another, when it is connected within small clusters of relationships, as well as humanity itself, society as a whole, looking forward to the betterment of society, not just living for today, but looking to the future, looking to make sure that humanity continues as long as possible. And since humanity is so interconnected with the rest of the world, with nature and other animals, that humanity, human beings, live a more fulfilling and even happier, more joyful life as we put ourselves in service to and helping not just other humans, but the whole of the world. Oftentimes humanism is kind of stereotyped as only looking out for humans. Well, no, actually, modern day contemporary humanism is very much about looking to all of the world. We're all interconnected. And so the better the rest of the world is, the better humans are. You start eliminating species in mass, that's going to have negative effects on humans as well. And so, we're all interconnected. So that's, I guess, how I would kind of define a healthy person, or at least one element of it.
Someone who, would you say that someone who is selfless in the sense of going out and living not for themselves but for other people? Is that what you're saying? Or?
Well, in part, okay. Because there is a distinct, many atheists I'm familiar with would say that one of the difficulties, one of the problems with at least some forms of religion anyway, is this idea of being vigilantly selfless, okay? So it's not, don't deny, no one expects you to deny yourself. I mean, you're here and we value you and we want you to live a fulfilled life. We don't want you to deny yourself. No, live yourself to the fullest. Enjoy life for all that it is in all of its wealth and all of its amazing experiences. Enjoy your life. But, and that's where then one of the many philosophies of how you find fulfillment would be humanism, as verbalized by the American Humanist Society, in saying that their suggestion, due to psychological studies and things like that, is that you will feel more fulfilled, you will feel happier as you are in service together and participating with community and relationships and things. So it's not the end result maybe looks the same externally, but internally the idea is that it produces a much different effect, because I'm not serving in order to deny myself because I'm bad or because, I'm just going to lay myself out as a sacrifice. No, I'm not serving out of a selfless attitude. I'm serving out of the betterment of myself as well as everyone else. It's sort of an uplift of everyone. I'm not denying myself to raise you up. No, I'm raising all of us up, and I'm included in that.
So, I guess, what would that internal state look like for the individual person besides being willing to, I guess, serve or live up to the fullest as a result of, I guess?
Say that first part again. So what would the internal state look like?
Like for an individual person, like for you personally. Okay, so let me give you an example of a Christian, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
In a Christian worldview, their idea of reaching the healthy point would be them kind of happy and at peace with the Lord, and as a result, becoming selfless and serving others out of their own desire, or out of, I guess, God working through them. So that would be like a healthy state.
Yeah.
So what would the internal kind of look like for an atheist?
Yeah. I think one of the big things, at least that I've seen, okay, is realizing that, a few things, that there's no one watching over your shoulder to monitor you, okay? So there's no one trying to define what makes you happy for you, okay? So in lots of religious perspectives, something is defining how you should feel happy, okay? No, you do this and you'll get happy. And though I mentioned the humanistic perspective of, well, you find greater fulfillment in participating in community and relationships, that's merely their suggestion. They're just offering that as a possibility. They're not saying, no, this is how it is and you need to subscribe to what we do or else, No. So there's no one looking over my shoulder saying this is how you have to find happiness. There's also no potential failed promises. Okay, that's something I found a lot. So I was the kind of pastor who got up every morning, took a knee in prayer and said, okay, God, what part of my life would you like me to sacrifice to you today? What area, what corner of my heart have I not yet quite fully yielded over to you? Reveal that to me, show it to me, and let me expose it to you. I did all those things. I sacrificed myself, but I was rarely... I said I was happy. I told myself I was happy. I told myself I was joyful. I told everybody else I was joyful. But really, I was as tormented as they come. And part of it is, the Bible says you will find peace. The Bible says you will find joy. The Bible promises by the Spirit, the more you walk in faith, the more faithful you are, the more you walk in unity with Christ, the more you will feel these things. But what about when you do those things and they don't happen? And it's not even on a continuum. It's not like, well, I'm progressing in this, and so at least I'm becoming a little more joyful. No. And so that's where, at least in my life, I found what really brought joy is really, listen, there's no promises. Nobody's promising me joy. I just need to look at myself, what makes me happy? Okay, we'll do it. And maybe the humanistic society is right, is that the more I engage in relationships and the more I give back to society and the more I'm just an honest, open, first of all with myself, but then also with those around me, the more I'm an honest, open person, the happier I will probably become, based on psychological studies and personal experiences of others. Maybe they're right, and so I experiment with that, and yeah, they kind of are. I like that. And maybe something else will come around later, but it's nobody telling me, one, looking over my shoulder telling me you have to do this, and two, nobody guaranteeing me that I'll find joy when I do. And so I think in terms of internal, how an atheist might work that out, at least from my limited perspective, again, atheists are as varied as humanity itself, but that's where I've seen anyway, and that's where I've seen in the lives of many others, just this incredible freedom that comes from just live your life. Is anything guaranteed? No, nothing's guaranteed. But just live your life and, do what, live your life according to what brings you happiness and joy. And many, like myself, would suggest that comes from giving back and living in community. Do those things, be a good person, benefit society, upbuild society, encourage people, be positive. Being negative is only going to make you negative, as well as bring negative effects on others. But quit trying to play a game or charade. Just be honest with yourself and be honest with everybody else. Yeah. Oh, that's great. So for an atheist, is hope in the present? Is it for the future? I would say it's a mix of both. I think that it's realizing that this life is all we have to live. For me and you. I want to make it better for both of us. And so, because this life is everything, let's live it to the fullest. And oftentimes that's interpreted as, so you mean sin, and I think we already kind of talked about that. No, that's not really what it is. In fact, living, either you define yourself as a moral person or you don't. Anyway, we've already talked about morality and all that stuff. But, so what do you look forward to? What brings you hope? I think it is making the most of today for the betterment of society, for the betterment of humanity, and where the forward thinking is saying, listen, because I care about you, because I care about all of us, because I care about humanity, and because I care about the world, I do want to set it up to be, to continue in an even better place than where I am today. Just like how parents oftentimes wish for their kids a better future than what they had, or that they would have even better lives than what they had, even better jobs, even better opportunities they want that for their kids. So we want that for humanity. We don't just want to squander today's resources, and just live for today. No, it is making the most of today, and also of tomorrow, and also of next year, and the decade to come, and the generation to come, and the millennia to come. It's making the most of this life.